Welcome to Professor and the Idiot podcast. This is episode 3. What are we going to be talking about this week, Dalton?
This is something that is definitely, it's a subject that you've talked about a lot on your Twitter. Hashtag me too. What does that mean? Where does it come from? The good, the bad, the ugly. Let's hear all about it.
It was first developed or proposed 10 years ago by an activist as a way of encouraging people to admit publicly that they too had been victims of sexual misconduct, including rape and sexual harassment. But it really entered the public consciousness last year when actress Alyssa Milano started tweeting it, and she has a large base of followers. And right away, it came to be associated with the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, who, by all appearances, is a monster. He said to women, if you want to be in movies, you'll have to fuck me.
That is terrible.
Yes.
Especially when you see pictures of this guy.
I mean, it's terrible no matter what he looks like.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's terrible, and he has now been charged criminally. So I view this as a necessary moment in American history. No civilized society can tolerate people who abuse their power to coerce sex from others. That's just unacceptable.
Yeah. For me personally, the Me Too, sexual assault, just that whole area of discussion of life, really wasn't talked about that much until the Harvey Weinstein accusations and whatnot happened. So, for better or for worse, like, as evil and as shitty as that man was, there is like a silver lining that his actions actually got the ball rolling for the country, the world to talk about this.
Oh, yes, and this hashtag was repeated in other languages in other countries as well.
That's great to hear.
And previously, most of the time, it would enter the public consciousness through a very high-profile case, like the guy who was the doctor at Michigan State.
Oh, that was terrible.
That was terrible. But one of the problems is a couple of the other really high-profile cases in the last 20 years that may ring a bell, including the Duke lacrosse team. Do you remember that?
I've only heard about it after the fact, so I wasn't paying attention in news stories like that as it was happening.
Yeah. So in that case from about 15 years ago, it was national news. It was a racial story because the accuser was an African-American woman and the alleged perpetrators were white, privileged lacrosse players, and it turned out to be fake. It turned out to be no assault at all.
Which is, there's multiple angles you can look at it. That's just terrible because these, poor students were dragged through the mud. And from what I can tell, seeing videos of people talk about it as it was going on, I mean, people were basically saying, like, these group of young men are a group of rapists. They're terrible people and whatnot.
Yeah.
And even when your name is cleared of something like that, there's still this stigma, this cloud that surrounds you.
Yeah.
You can never fully escape.
Yeah.
So it takes a very long time to escape something like that.
And there's baggage from this because it leads people to think maybe a lot of accusations are fake. Right?
And that's another thing too, is, the bad part of something like that happening is, one, like you said, a lot of people go, well, how do we know they're not just lying about it? They're not just faking it because it's happened in the past. And it has, and I'm sure it will happen in the future. But it also, that type of action, those events, discredit or they don't help victims of real events.
They hurt, Oh, it's terrible for just that reason. That's why I think accurate reporting is essential. And so one of the biggest untruths that we hear over and over again even President Obama repeated it, was that 1 out of every 5 women in college will be sexually assaulted. And
And
that's not true.
yeah, just saying it, like if you just think about it, it's like that's just insane. And if it was true, for sure don't go to college.
Yeah, absolutely. If that were true, there would be policemen every 5 feet on a college campus. There is still too much sexual assault in our society. It is really an unfathomable evil, but I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by repeating untruths like 1 out of every 5 women.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really appreciate about your knowledge and skill set is you teach the statistics, you understand them very well, you know a good study from a bad study.
Right.
And that's one of the great things that you'll bring to this podcast is your knowledge of data and how to sift through all the data.
Right.
Because that is a statistic. That is something that people cite.
Yeah.
Oh, a university published it or whoever published it. 1 in 5, and it gets repeated a million times, and that actually harms the cause that a lot of people are trying to promote.
I totally agree. Numbers like 1 in 5 came from studies that only had a small sample, that only looked at a couple of colleges. Best number that I've seen is 2.5%, which comes from Federal Department of Justice statistics. And thanks to a law called the Clery Act, colleges have to report crimes that occur on campus. And so there's some reason to believe that's a credible number. It also should be pointed out that most sexual assaults are not reported. So that's certainly that's still a lot lower than 1 in 5.
Yeah. And that is one of the tough things about finding data like this is it's not a crime, like you said, it is reported a lot because of embarrassment, fear of backlash, trauma-related things. So it is an unfortunate side to stuff like that is victims a lot of time don't want to say anything.
Yeah. It's also important to note that women are less likely to be assaulted if they are in college than young women in the same age group who are not students.
And that's like that is the exact opposite of what a lot of people would think. There's a certain narrative out there that colleges are just these rape factories. I don't know what word to use, but like that's a big concern. I think a lot of parents have concerns about because they hear stuff like that.
Yeah. However, I should note that male college students are more likely to be assaulted than non-students of the same age.
I mean, colleges are filled with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't surprise me that much.
Yeah. And one finding that seems pretty reliable are that there are more sexual assaults right at the beginning of the school year in August and September, when people don't have friends, they don't know the landscape, are more likely to be alone and without friends around them. And so, yes, certainly assaults do occur in fraternities. I don't mean to minimize that at all, but just we're doing this cause no good if we exaggerate its prevalence.
Yeah, because then people who want to downplay it see the differences and say, you've been saying 1 in 5 this whole time, and it's not that, so then they go too far to say, oh, you're full of shit.
Yep. So it's important to note that rates, just like all serious crimes, rates of sexual assault have fallen a lot in the past 25 years. So in 1993, the federal government reported 4.3 assaults per 1,000 people. That number is down to 1.2 per 1,000 in 2016. So sexual assault has become less common over time.
Why do you think that is?
So I think it's all crime has declined a lot, all violent crime. And so scientists, there's no way to have a definitive answer, and people are still arguing about why. But certainly there was a lot of crime associated with the crack epidemic in the 1980s. Crime increased a lot starting in the 1960s, just as a result of the big shifts in society. That was the decade of huge, major assassinations: John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King. It was the decade of Vietnam. It was the decade of the hippies. People started to reject social norms. The psychologist Steven Pinker described it as a decivilizing era.
And I'm sure the
Yeah.
drug war obviously has
Yeah.
contributed to that.
Yes. Now, so why is it fallen? Those certainly the crack epidemic burned itself out. We restored those social norms that had been threatened for a couple of decades. Now, that's only scientists ultimately aren't sure why it's declined, but it's important to note that all violent crime has become less common in recent decades.
And that's great to hear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. It's good. It's good news.
There's a lot of people that don't know that. My dad
Yeah.
and grandpa are definitely the type of people who are, well, you know how the world's turning out to be. The world's getting worse and coming to an end, those type of people. So.
Oh, that's human bias, right? Think about back when I was your age kind of bias, and the fact that the news only reports terrible shit. If it bleeds, it leads.
Yep, exactly.
Right. There has also been real progress in how society treats sexual assault. I probably know that 50 years ago in most states it was not a crime to rape your wife.
I just don't understand how laws could dictate that.
Yeah, it's terrible, but that's past few decades have seen a lot of positive development in terms of human rights. Women having equal legal rights to men, legal rights for gays and lesbians. We've seen a lot, equal. The whole civil rights era has produced a move towards, a more equitable society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually have a side note to that. It wasn't a crime to rape your wife. The reason I am alive is because my mom was the product of a marital rape. My grandpa raped my grandma, and my mom was born because of that.
That's a horrific story, Dalton.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for that.
So the laws, were a lot of other laws were really primitive by modern standards. Rape would typically only be prosecuted if there was evidence of physical resistance. Many states required a corroborating witness, which is not how most rapes happen. When you went to trial, evidence about the woman's sex life would be introduced. In other words, or slut shaming would happen.
Yeah.
Most of the time, just no one reported it because the police wouldn't do anything. And movies commonly depicted scenes in which a woman was raped and then enjoyed it by the end. A landmark moment was the publication of a book in 1975 by a woman named Susan Brown Miller called Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape, in which she drew a lot of positive attention to these awful depictions of rape in movies. It's credited with much wider public attention and legal reform, but a lot of the time people remember it just for what was a single throwaway line in the book, which she said that rape is a crime of violence, not sex.
Yeah, it's all about power.
Well, that now increasingly scientists think that's not true.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So,
I guess all the crime shows I've been watching have been wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the public consciousness. She said she included this line. Just one of her professors had speculated this might be true, but, a lot of the recent evidence suggests it's not true. So let's get back to the present and Me Too. So part of it was, as we both agreed a minute earlier ago, was necessary. There's no place for Harvey Weinsteins and people who abuse their power or coerce sex. No place for people like Bill O'Reilly. But there's also the other side of Me Too was internet mobs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Many of the men denounced have proven to be guilty, they left their jobs, or at least by all appearances look guilty, but not all. For example, there were accusations against George Takei, Sulu from the original Star Trek.
Yeah.
And those accusations quickly fell apart, and the accuser recanted.
I always just wonder, like, why would the person say anything like that?
Right.
What's the gain from
I don't know. I honestly don't know what leads to false accusations.
Okay.
Yeah. So something else that got some news at the time was something that materialized called the shitty media. Let me say that again. Shitty media men's list. And that is a woman just started a anonymous Google Doc that anyone could edit, which had the lists of about 75 men and the allegations of what they had done wrong, from inappropriate sexual advances to rape.
Anyone can edit it?
Yes.
Well, that doesn't seem like a good idea.
Right. Yeah, so people made that point quickly enough, right? This raises the specter of internet mobs and a lack of justice, a lack of due process. But on the other hand, I can understand the need to have this in the first place. Don't work with these men, they're dangerous, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a terrible situation because when, like the Harvey Weinstein thing, it's like this guy has the keys to what I've been working for towards my whole life.
Yes.
So to come out and have accusations or, to say certain things about him, that could literally end your whole career, everything you've worked for.
Yep.
So
I don't know if there's a magic bullet solution here, but I think Me Too has made it more acceptable to raise these accusations.
Yeah. I hope it does like both things where women do have more confidence to say things, and then also the men who might do those certain things might think twice about it.
And we should point out, this is sexual assault is gendered. 9 out of 10 victims are women, but we should remember that there are male victims too. And there is even greater stigma for the men in reporting that they've been assaulted, because men are supposed to be strong and all that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a statistic, but there's a point I don't follow anybody, but I've heard it talked about in podcasts like men's rights activists.
Yeah.
Like, more men get raped. Joe Rogan had a great comment about this. He's like, yeah, people say, oh, all these men get raped in prison. It's like, yeah, they're getting raped by men.
Yeah.
So it's like you're not really helping your point out, really.
I mean, that is a serious problem. Rape in prison, which prisons are understaffed. People are afraid to snitch, but that's a really serious problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's largely men who are committing these crimes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just agree about those men's rights activists. I agree with what Joe Rogan was saying about them.
Okay.
I wanted to talk more about college campuses and the changing laws there, because I have some personal experience with being accused and being found innocent.
Okay. And this is all encompasses the Title IX issue of colleges.
Yes.
So I never even heard about it until really I saw you tweeting about it.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people like me, the idiots, they don't even know what Title IX is. Right. So can you give a history summary of that?
Sure. So in a nutshell, Title IX dates back to a 1972 law mandating gender equity on campus. No educational program could be denied to anyone on the basis of sex. Right. Now, it seems like 2018, that seems almost unnecessary, but the majority of college students back then were male, and women were routinely shut out of college programs, at all levels, just because they were women. can tell you stories from the women in my family who were denied opportunities because they were women. And so Title IX was an important piece of legislation for that reason. A lot of time we think about it in terms of sports because it also mandates equity in sports too.
And when you say that, like you said, that's funding, because like there's no women's football teams.
Right. But doesn't mean there has to be a women's football team. But what it meant was back then in 1972, the male athletes would have fancy gyms and facilities, and the women would have dingy closets.
Yeah.
So that has meant that some men's programs were dropped. That's why the University of Utah doesn't have a wrestling team, for instance.
That's because
of Title IX?
There's not enough funding for a women's program, or there's no women, or there's not enough women to have a wrestling team, so they cancel the men.
The former.
How do you feel about that?
You know, if I were a college wrestler at the University of Utah, I might be pissed, but ultimately it's fair.
But there's no women's wrestling team.
But there are other teams available to women that wouldn't exist without Title IX.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused. So it's more about the funding,
yes,
than the availability of the athletes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what basically Title IX meant gender fairness, gender equity on campus, and so opportunities for female athletics were increased, but that has come to some extent to the availability of opportunities for male athletes.
Right. Which would you say is a overall good thing?
Overall, yes. Overall, I think it's been a very good thing. But now the landscape has changed, and now a majority of college students are women. And so there has been a series of new Title IX challenges suggesting that while in years gone by it was women who were discriminated against, now it's men. So it's questioning the availability of scholarships and programs for women when they are the majority of college students.
When you say majority, do you know percentage?
It is over 50 and below 60. I can give you an exact number. All I know is that it's a majority, it's more, and it's not a small difference.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a really amazing trend and that's not just undergraduate students, that's graduate students too.
I remember my sociology teacher. Yeah. He said that basically, in a roundabout way, he basically said men are at home playing video games and women are out there.
Yep. Yep. You know, a lot of people have made that point recently. Claire Lehman of Quillette just tweeted something like that a couple of days ago. Yeah. So Title IX, in its original capacity, was great and important. Having legalized discrimination is uncivilized. But this gradually changed, with the big change coming in 2011. In that year, a bunch of journalists got worked up over that specious 1 in 5 women on college campuses is sexually assaulted. And as a result, the Department of Education sent new instructions to all universities in what's called a Dear Colleague letter. And so they gave instructions to colleges that were both strong and confusing. So what they said is, from here on forward, you have to pursue all complaints of sexual misconduct as violations of Title IX, as violations of women's right to have to college education. And so when you hold hearings, when someone is accused, the burden of proof you should use is a weaker legal standard. You should use the preponderance of evidence standard rather than the stronger, clear, and convincing standard. Now, just to back up, think about how in a criminal case, you have to be guilty without any shadow of doubt, right?
Yes.
Civil case lawsuit, lower burden of proof. Often it's clear and convincing evidence. Sometimes it's just a preponderance of evidence. And that simply means more evidence than not, or what's sometimes called 50% in a feather. Okay, so the Dear Colleague letter of 2011 instructed colleges to pursue cases of sexual misconduct using that weaker standard. It changed the definition of sexual harassment from essentially so bad it interferes with your ability to do college into any unwanted sexual conduct.
So somebody winking at you could be considered that,
You,
technically.
at first people thought that was ridiculous, but then when the absurd cases started piling up, yes.
Right. So when it says that these are the instructions from the Department of Education, colleges have to follow this.
So now
this is college's fault.
Okay, so there was also a compliance mechanism. So what the Department of Education did was it established a list of shame. If your college wasn't energetic enough in pursuing these cases, you could be on the list of shame. And most important, it threatened them with compliance reviews. That is, a number of government lawyers would come and see how you've been handling sexual misconduct cases, and that could cost your college hundreds of thousands of dollars.
There was an actual quote-unquote list of shame?
Yes, there is a federal list of shame. So that's how the government forced colleges and universities to do all this stuff, with the list and the threat of the reviews. Okay. And so then cases like you described started emerging. Like a guy asked his girlfriend for a head, and he got thrown out of college for it.
Right?
Well, and I can
know if you don't ask.
Right. Always true. In another case, there were two guys in a relationship, and one dude kissed his boyfriend when he was sleeping.
So who complained?
Then they broke up, and then the boyfriend who had been kissed said, "He didn't have my permission to kiss me."
Well, how did he know he kissed him if he was asleep?
That's a good question, but Brandeis said, "You're right, he shouldn't have kissed you," and then suspended the kisser. Now, how do we know about these cases? Universities always conduct these investigations in secret, so we know about them when they go to trial.
Right? An actual criminal.
No, yeah, or actually more often a civil case, and in this case, it's because the kid who had been suspended sued.
Yeah. Okay,
and so the judge said in response, "This is bullshit, right? This is a ridiculous case." And Brandeis did not, act in there was no justice in how Brandeis did this. In other words, it was ridiculous that a guy should be suspended from school for kissing his sleeping boyfriend.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah, so
were these type of complaints, so I guess what I'm wondering is, were these type of complaints happening before this, but they were just dismissed? Or, how did people find out that, if I complain about this little tiny thing, I can get this person in trouble?
So people start after this letter in 2011 is when these cases started to emerge, or at least a lot of them, and people started learning about it.
Okay.
So I learned about it 2 years ago because I was accused.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Sure. The first thing to understand about how these cases go is it's not like justice in a court of law where you're presumed innocent until guilty and there's a jury and a judge to keep the whole thing fair and an attorney. Here's what happened. I got an email from someone, an attorney lawyer, saying, "Please contact me to discuss an important matter." And he didn't say what. And so I emailed him and he said, "We have to have a meeting." And I said, "I'm out of state indefinitely." And he said, "There's been a complaint against you." And I said, "I'm still not coming for a meeting because I'm out of state." And I said, "Send me the charges." And he said, "We don't usually do that." And I finally said, "I'm out of state for a long time. Please send me the charges." And so
were you worried at that time?
I was confused. Right. Okay. I was just confused.
Because and we'll get to that, but you're an innocent person, so you're like, whoa, what the hell's happening?
Yes. And so I finally got the charges. Among the things I was accused of miscellaneous forms of sexual harassment, including, here's the best. I told a colleague that I had proposed to my wife in a strip club.
And how is that harassment?
I don't know, Dalton.
For people like me, that's the first question that comes to mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that was in the case right now. It didn't matter that this happened almost 20 years ago. That happened soon after I was hired at the University of Utah in 1998. A bunch of us young professors went around the corner for pizza and beer, and in my case, Diet Coke. And we talked. We're all young people, around 30, and we talked about how we got married. And someone asked the question of my wedding proposal, and I said it happened at a strip club, which it did.
Okay, well now we gotta divert again.
Sure.
How and why would you propose to your then wife or fiance at a strip club?
Because a stripper asked us how long we'd been together, and I told her 2 years, and the stripper said, "So why aren't you married?" So at that point, I asked Jessica to marry me.
And she said yes.
Yes, so we went downtown and to the courthouse, which in Vegas is open 24 hours a day on weekends for people who want to get married. This is about 3 a.m.
This sounds romantic to me. This
Huh,
sounds like
yeah.
a
Oh
true
yeah.
love story.
It was a nice weekend. We're no longer married, but it worked out great. We remained really close friends. So anyhow, that's neither here nor there. The point is, how is this harassment? I don't know, but it went on like this. There was a lot of hearsay, like third-party accounts. Like, I invited a colleague to do some research, to work on a research project, and I had them work in my bedroom. And in the bedroom, there was a computer with porn on it. So, where's the truth in that? I have a close friend who's a colleague, and yes, we worked at my house. We worked in the living room. I didn't even have a computer in the bedroom, so there certainly wasn't porn on it.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you're definitely professional enough to not do that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was even, this is the creepiest was a reporter had contacted my university to say I was sexually inappropriate.
Okay.
So,
So,
now, how so? That's about as far as it went. The university tried to contact her and didn't hear back from her. So, how? I don't know. What reporter? I've talked to hundreds of them in the course of my careers. What did I say? I don't know. Was this person even a reporter? I don't know. But that's fucking scary. That if you are a student or a faculty member, that anyone can contact your university to rat you out at any time.
yeah, because if you're a research professor like you
Yeah,
are, if
yeah,
you do some sort of research that might reveal something negative
yeah,
about a
yeah,
company or a
yeah,
person that is factual, they
yeah.
could just make a quick phone call
Yep.
and cause you a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, and in fact, this has happened. People have tried to get ethics complaints filed against professors when they don't like what the researchers are doing. So anyhow, there were a bunch of charges like this. It it went on and on. I've written about this at length. I instantly hired a lawyer as soon as I told the university I'd hired a lawyer. They became conciliatory. And about 3 or 4 months later, they decided I was not guilty of all these charges. So, what did this cost me? I got off lightly compared to many other people, like the students who were expelled from school, right? I had to pay a bunch of lawyers' fees, and it ate up a bunch of my time. But I was lucky.
Were you worried?
No, it was just such bullshit.
But even
Yeah,
still,
yeah,
with the climate, Title IX, the school
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
like, did you realize that the Title IX issue was as big of an issue as it is at that time?
No, it wasn't until afterwards that a friend told me about a Northwestern professor named Laura Kipnis who had just written a book about this that I realized it was a thing. At the time, I just thought it was the university trying to fuck with me in their own unique way.
Oh, so you thought it was like You didn't think it was like a nationwide?
No, I didn't know.
Okay.
Now, I mean, I know it was just, as I sorted through it, I know it was just one person who filed the complaint. I knew she had a axe to grind with me for a long time. Why, I don't know. I think she's batshit crazy. But anyhow, so I don't know why. Title IX just gave her a weapon, a tool to fuck with me.
And so could you have? So obviously you spent money for the lawyers. Could you have countersued? Could you have? Because they don't give you the names of the accusers, right?
No.
But obviously most people, I'm sure, know who it might be.
Yeah.
At least. Could you have done anything as far as countersuing? Not that you would want to, but
yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, I could have sued. It's a free country. You can sue whoever you want. One reason I did not is because of the adage that the best form of revenge is living well, right? And so if you sue, does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you sued, you have to think about it every day.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I actually have family members that have gone through multiple lawsuits just because the principle of something, but yet at the end of the day, they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So this would never have occurred without the 2011 Dear Colleague letter. It turned Title IX into a weapon, and you even hear undergraduate students using it as a verb. Like, he fucks you and he didn't call him back, Title IX his ass.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. I have involved with a national organization called FACE, which is just a support group for people who have been accused. It's been life-changing because often they're young kids who've been thrown out of college and they can no longer gain admission to any college.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
And now, so there's a lot of pushback against reform against this type of stuff.
Yeah.
Because someone like you and me, it's like, well, if a crime happened, if something happens, well, the police should be involved.
Yeah, I certainly think so, right? If there's a felony, it should be reported to the police because otherwise the police know how to investigate felonies. And now, have they always done a good job? No. Traditionally, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, they didn't handle it at all, but they're much better about it than they used to be. But it's not perfect. There's a national scandal that sitting in police stations, there's 10,000 rape kits. That is physical examinations of women who've been assaulted, vaginal swabs, and so forth. 10,000 kits that have gone untested.
That's just terrible.
Yeah, it is.
I guess part of me is very surprised, part of me is not, but there is this culture or natural instinct for men to protect women. I mean, most men you come across, if there was a woman they know or even a stranger that was being harmed by a man, the natural instincts for that man is to inflict as much harm upon the perpetrator as possible. So it's very weird to me, like you said earlier about police not really doing anything about these crimes. Right. It's very puzzling.
There were, in the past in America, there were built-in inequities. The men and women were treated equally by the law. There was Jim Crow in the South where African Americans did not enjoy equal rights. Marriage equality, the right of gay and lesbians to get married, is a pretty new thing that's happened in the past few years. So we've come a long way.
In a very short amount of time.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm pretty impressed.
Yeah, I am too. So, God, there's a lot to say about Title IX. Think about how I was investigated. This was a single investigator who was judge, investigator, and jury.
That's scary.
Yeah. So that's not how it should be. Let me mention I mentioned a couple of frivolous cases, the Brandeis Kissers, the kid expelled for a blowjob. There's a case at USC in which not only did the kid protest his innocence, but his girlfriend also said, he didn't do anything to me, but the college still expelled him.
What? So was it her that accused him or
It was
friends?
it was a friend.
That's just
Yeah.
such a slippery, scary slope
Yeah.
where even the quote unquote victim can even say, no, no, it's fine. But
Yeah.
people still go, nope,
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah. I guess if there's any silver lining when people have taken these cases to court, the university has lost over and over again. More than 200 times, courts have said this is a miscarriage of judgment. One judge even said, "Where's the kangaroo?"
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now because of that,
Yeah.
has schools kind of backed off, especially with the publicity that comes about?
Not at all.
Wow.
Huh.
Okay.
One other case I wanted to talk about because it's been in the news is the case of my friend Pamela Smock at the University of Michigan. That's a good school. That's one of the best public schools in the country. Pam Smock is a sociologist and a much more prominent academic than I am. And she was accused a couple of years ago by 3 of her graduate students. And this was payback because she had accused one of them of plagiarism. And
Acute or like, so when if a professor accuses, that just like her personally saying to the
yeah,
student, you plagiarize, or is this a public
you know,
type of thing?
I don't know if she had what level, if it was just a personal thing or if it was something institutional. So that's note that this happens with Title IX, since universities feel compelled to investigate any charges, no matter how frivolous, people can just use it as a revenge mechanism. So they investigated her, and they also said that she had weapons in her office. So a SWAT team tore her office apart, didn't find any weapons.
They
Uh,
sent a SWAT team.
what?
They sent a SWAT
Yeah,
team?
they sent a fucking SWAT team to tear apart her office.
Christ.
Yeah, that's crazy shit. And so her university does the investigation, and they find her not guilty, which is good. But then her dean decides to punish her anyhow, just because he can. And he freezes her salary and limits her ability to work with graduate students and some other stuff. And so she sues. And like a lot of these cases, we know about it because someone filed a suit. That's the only way it gets out in public. And I think that's great. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Anyhow, one point of this case is don't assume that the victims are all men. They're not. Women too get accused. Also, studies have shown that non-white minorities are more likely to get accused in Title IX cases than whites.
That's scary, the
Yeah.
potential power, you know.
Yep.
That's, you
Yep.
can just create a false witch hunt on somebody by just saying one little thing.
Yeah.
And then,
Absolutely.
like you said, even after you're proven not guilty,
Yeah.
schools and faculty, whatever, can
Yeah.
continue this bullshit.
And indeed, my university tried the same bullshit with me. It ended up going away, and I didn't have to sue to do it, but it still took more time and cost me more money in attorney's fees. And I've written about this publicly. And so one point I make is these bullshit cases are an insult to people who have been sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
They make the whole thing seem more frivolous because if people see a lot of cases along these lines, you know, like what happened to me or what happened to Pam Smock, people are likely to think that sexual assault in general is bullshit, and that's a dangerous perception.
How do professors you've talked to feel about this? Do they feel the same way you do about this Title IX stuff?
That's a good question. And the people who are my long-term friends, they see it the same way. They're open to seeing it the way I see it, that this is a terrible system that was introduced in 2011, but many do not. That's the point I wanted to move on to. So just recently, the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, introduced a whole new system. It raised the burden of proof back to clear and convincing evidence rather than a preponderance of evidence. It introduced the option of mediation if both parties agree to it, and it restored the right of someone accused to question the accuser. Now, there's protections, so the rape victim doesn't have to physically confront her assailant. They can be in another room. A third party can do the questioning. I think overall this is a very sensible set of reforms. And while in general I'm not a fan of Betsy DeVos, I think she's right here.
Why do you think she has brought about these changes? Especially, and I remember when she got appointed, everybody was kind of shocked that, like, she might not have been the most qualified person for the job. What do you think her motivation is to bring these changes in?
I don't know. I know right away, to an important post in the Department of Education, she hired someone who had been an officer in a nonprofit called FIRE. FIRE is a nonprofit that stands up for civil liberties in higher education and has been a big critic of the 2011 system. Right away, DeVos.
And there's been a lot of backlash. I've seen you post some things on Twitter where I think because Trump appointed her and maybe her other views or policies she might be trying, do you think people are automatically assuming that these changes are bad because they're coming from her, or that they just don't understand the situation?
I think both, or at least I'd like to think both. So universities, their instant reaction was, the system we have is working fine. You're part of the Trump government. We don't like Trump, so this is bullshit and we're not going to do it.
Right. Yeah, and I really do appreciate how vocal you've been about, like, no, this is actually a good thing.
Yeah, well, I have firsthand experience. And I say of these new guidelines and DeVos, even a broken clock can be right twice a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, universities are going to resist this, and for the reason I just gave, and also because the whole thing has been professionalized. There's now a system of highly paid Title IX consultants. So this is their livelihood on the line. And something I mentioned in passing to you a couple weeks ago, Harvard now has 50 Title IX enforcers.
That's crazy.
Oh, yeah, it's totally crazy. The other interesting thing about Harvard is Harvard Law School. There are a lot of faculty there who looked at the 2011 system and said, wait, this is bullshit. This is unconstitutional. So over 25 Harvard law professors signed an open letter criticizing that system. One in particular, a woman named Jeannie Suk Gerson, has written a lot about it. And so Harvard Law School has its own separate policy that's fairer. How's that for wacky?
Yeah. Well, they understand the law probably very clearly, so it's probably hard to argue against them. Yeah.
So this is the reaction from many people has been disappointing to me. The columnist Emily Yaffe, I think, said it best. Democrats don't seem to care about due process. Republicans don't seem to care about women. Even the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, in just an appalling set of tweets, somehow attacked the system and stood up for injustice. It was a disappointing and crazy moment.
Yeah, I think I saw that. Some people are saying, like, what happened to the ACLU?
Yeah, I think what DeVos has proposed is good. I hope it's adopted, but, universities are going to put up a fight, and so there will be more lawsuits, and we have to see what the compliance mechanisms are for making sure universities adopt the new policy.
So universities have the choice to adopt it or not?
No, these are guidelines handed down, but obviously the universities aren't under the direct control of the federal government, so there has to be some kind of compliance mechanism, some way of forcing them to adopt it. Right. Just as the 2011 policies, the compliance mechanism was the threat of a review, of an audit, and a federal blacklist, there need to be compliance mechanisms for the new policies, or loss or forcible adaptation because the courts order them to. But that's how we do things in America.
Okay. So there's not a timeline of when this could be implemented, or because when is Betsy DeVos going to hand down the legislative guidelines or whatever to these?
Okay, so There is currently a legally mandated period for open comments. And so that's the law, that there has, for big administrative changes that come from the executive branch, there has to be time for the public to comment. And so that's happening now. You can do that online. There's a couple of months available for people to comment. In 2011, the Department of Education did not do that. There was no open comment period. But so maybe the guidelines will change in response to the comments. But I encourage listeners, if you have a dog in this fight, if you have a strong opinion, go comment.
Hmm. Have you received any backlash yourself for the articles you've written and how outspoken you've been about this? Publicly, at least. I mean, I'm not asking you to reveal private.
Oh, not at all. The only backlash I've gotten is occasionally some anonymous person on Twitter. One of those people who doesn't use their real name but just a pseudonym. So,
Yeah.
a little pseudonymous backlash. But really, it's, I like to think the voice of reason here.
Well, I read your, is it Quillette?
Yes. Yeah, Quillette.
I read that article, and it's frightening,
Yeah.
just how quick things can go so bad for innocent people.
It should be. It should be frightening. The fact that anyone can accuse you at any time, that's un-American.
Yeah.
Yeah. To repeat something I've said throughout this episode, America should not tolerate, sexual harassment at work, rape, sexual coercion like Harvey Weinstein did, but at the same time, we're a nation that values due process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hate to say it, but that's a problem with the slogan, Believe Women.
Yeah, that's a crazy thing to say, because are women people too? So if they're people lie, people have mental issues, people do bad things, make wrong choices. So,
and we should be believing everyone enough to take all accusations seriously, but there should always be due process.
Yeah. How do you think the Brett Kavanaugh situation has affected this Me Too?
How do I think it? It was really polarizing in America. I mean, it's certainly, there were already stark political divisions. This made this even worse. Keep in mind, this was not a legal proceeding where the outcome was Kavanaugh would go to jail. Even if he were denied a Supreme Court seat, he still would have had a federal judgeship. My position is this. She certainly seemed credible, but it was a long time ago. I opposed him anyhow for other reasons, for his pro-business rulings, for a really radical vision of executive power, and that was only reinforced by his conduct in the hearing. He was aggressive and had paranoid conspiratorial thoughts. That was not a judicial temperament, as I'd like to see. That was not very temperate how he acted.
I didn't really see too much of the hearings. I kind of just thought, I'll just wait till the dust settles and then kind of look at it. But I guess one argument for him I've heard is, like, imagine if you were him, though, and I didn't see his temperament, so I'm not defending it or anything, but imagine being in front of the whole world, and somebody is saying you're part of this group of gang rapists and doing all this horrible things as a kid, and if you really didn't do it, imagine how frustrating that would be.
Right. Still, though, you are on a huge stage. You are being at the cusp of being appointed one of the most powerful people in America. I'd like to see humility there from him. And imagine also how she felt, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, did he do it? We'll never know. I would have opposed him anyhow. The whole thing was a really ugly, shameful moment, I think, for America.
Yeah, you definitely saw a lot of hysteria on both sides of.
Yeah.
We're letting a rapist be a Supreme Court justice, or there's this grand conspiracy by people on the left that are deep into politics to do anything and everything that they can do to stop this from happening, and both of which are terrifying.
Well, if you are on the right, hopefully you can understand it, given how Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, just stole a Supreme Court pick from Obama just by saying that there wouldn't even be hearings for Merrick Garland. Certainly, in that backdrop, the whole thing was polarized already. So,
Why do you think the Republicans were so dead set? And we'll wrap up the Kavanaugh thing right now. But why do you think they didn't just go, okay, we don't know what happened, but maybe let's pick someone else?
there were some conservatives who were saying that, right? They could easily get someone, approve someone with less baggage, but abiding passion of Trump is simply to own the libs.
So it was not about, it was about not being wrong.
I think so, right? Because they could have chosen someone else, someone just as conservative. They could have chosen a woman conservative, right? But they did. They went all in on Kavanaugh, and I think really that's a big part of Trump's victory. And what Trump supporters want is just owning the libs.
Yeah. Okay, what do you think the state of Me Too is today? Where do you think it's going? Due process? I don't know. What do you think about it now that all these events have happened? Certain good things have happened with it, bad things have happened with it, pertaining to it. What do you think is going to happen next?
I think there will be less tolerance of monsters like Harvey Weinstein. I'd like to think that, especially stuff I've read recently, people are getting tired of or skeptical or frustrated with just online mobs, online witch hunts. They happen constantly. The latest one is the guy who just won the Heisman Trophy for football. Someone unearthed a tweet he wrote when he was 15 where he used the slur queer to describe gay people. And the kid was mobbed and then apologized, and then the mob seemed to back off a little bit and say, cut the kid a little bit of slack. Yes, he said something shitty when he was young, but he was young and he's older now. I'd like to think that people were getting collectively worn out by online mobs that convict people without the benefit of a trial. Hopefully, but I try to be an optimist. I don't know. What's your sense of internet mobs and if they're getting weaker?
Yeah, I think people are tired of it. I wish people, when a backlash comes at them, depending on what the backlash is, but I wish there were more people that basically say, fuck you, I don't care. It kind of takes away the power of the Twitter mobs and whatnot. So you brought up the Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah.
That
was just in the last couple days.
Yeah, I saw that, but I didn't see exactly what it says. So,
Yeah.
So do you think this Me Too type movement has encompasses more than just sexual misconduct and assault?
It's
Like the mob mentality type thing?
Yeah. Well, certainly there are a lot of internet mobs that go beyond just sexual misconduct. So, wow, I think that's a bigger question that we can get to. Certainly there are other kinds of mobs. Tough question, Dalton. I hope we will keep the heightened awareness and the need to take accusations seriously. I hope we can take what's been good about this away.
Yeah, I think it'll be a net positive. I do wish, I don't know how you could do this, but maybe this movement, this period in time, will give women more confidence to speak up right when something happens, because like with the Kavanaugh thing and other things that have been, I mean, I think a lot of people just go, okay, even if it did happen, why are you bringing it up now 20, 30 years later?
I think there's a reasonable explanation for that. She tries to put it out of her mind to get on with her life, and suddenly she sees this guy. He's in the news. He's going to be on the Supreme Court. And so, I could see why. I think it happened when he was on a list of potential nominees, why she might react then. There's also, keep in mind, the costs. She received death threats. She had to move, right? So
Well,
it's,
the Kavanaugh situation is a little
yeah,
different, and I totally see what you're saying about
yeah,
the news and a victim of a possible victim of
yeah,
his would be very frustrated. But just in general,
yeah.
there's been celebrities, movie stars, and stuff that have been accused about things that have happened decades.
Right. Well, now we're in Me Too made it acceptable to. I mean, the whole point of it is you are not alone, been victimized, right? There are other people, and that makes it more acceptable to speak up.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of my point. Is I hope it now,
Yeah.
so events that happen now and in the future, victims do have the courage to speak up right when it happens instead of waiting so long.
I certainly hope so.
And also
Yeah.
because my one of my thoughts is like, okay, let's say someone did something bad to you. If you don't speak up, it's very likely or possible that that person is going to continue to do that to other people in the future. So by
Yeah.
speaking up and having the confidence to do so, you might save other victims.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's hope we can move to a more just society where victims can speak up, where there is due process, where people don't try to abuse their power by victimizing people of less power. At the same time, I should point out, I think we'll never have a society with no sexual assault and no sexual misconduct. Part of it, it will always occur. Part of it is deeply rooted in human nature. And no matter how much progress we make, there'll still be some, and that's lamentable, but I think that's just reality.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right about that. It's, I guess, until we're all have computer chips inside of us with cameras that and record what we see here and whatnot, some Black Mirror episode.
Yeah.
So, yeah, until then.
Until then.
But I do like the stats you cited that it is getting less and less prevalent.
Yes. Yes. I think this seems like a natural closing point, so shall we bring this episode to an end?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to episode 3 of The Professor and the Idiot. We'll be back next week. Get off your ass, go to Apple Podcasts and other places you find this, and give us a good rating so that others can share.
Yeah, find us on Instagram and Facebook. Like us, share us. If there's a subject recommendation, we're all for it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Critique us, congratulate us, praise us, anything. So
organize demonstrations against us, denounce us.
Yeah. Sure, it brings us more popularity.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. We're back at on The Professor and the Idiot for a follow-up to episode 3, where it occurred to me that there were a couple more things I wanted to say about Me Too and sexual assault justice in higher education.
Okay. What did you have to add to that?
I talked about why universities were opposed to the new guidelines that would create a fair system, but I didn't really do justice to why so many people are so opposed. There's been a lot of articles in the paper, and even the ACLU has come out against the new guidelines. And I don't agree with these people, but I wanted to do justice to what they were saying.
Okay.
So they fear the new guidelines will lead fewer female students on campuses to report being sexually assaulted, that the fact that the new policy calls for cross-examination will be hard on sexual assault survivors. And Yeah, that will be hard on them. I can't dispute that, but I think it's necessary in the interest of fairness. And the fact that they may have to put up with some uncomfortable questioning is ultimately less important than protecting the rights of presuming people innocent before guilty.
Now, with these new guidelines, because the big problem, it seems to me, from talking to you before and seeing other stuff online, is the police aren't getting involved with this. It's all the school handling this.
Right.
So with these new guidelines, would police be brought in?
There's no mandatory need for universities to report to police. Right. This is a separate extrajudicial system. Now, I'm of the opinion that felonies should always be reported to the police.
I can't imagine anybody logically disagreeing with that.
Rape is a felony. But some people don't want to report. Some survivors don't want it to be as big a deal. They fear the criminal justice system will treat them unfairly. And so I can't emphasize enough the folly of having a university investigate felonies. They don't have the forensic capacity the police do. They don't have experience with it. They don't have an established criminal justice system. But still, there will be cases that will fall short of criminal. In particular, I'm thinking of sexual harassment cases. So there has to be some system on campus, just as any company needs a system for handling sexual misconduct.
Yeah, the cops can't be called for every little thing.
Yeah.
So should there... I don't know how you would do it, but should there be more encouragement for victims of a severe accusation or crime or whatever, a severe act, be more encouraged to contact the police first than the school?
I'm not sure if that's part of the guidelines. I think this will still be an independent system, but I know it's been proposed that universities should it should be required for universities to report all felonies to the police. I think that would be better, but that's not the world we live in.
I don't know how that isn't a requirement. That seems crazy to me.
Now, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, there is something called the Clery Act, but that's only about reporting crimes to the Federal Department of Justice, to the government. That's not about reporting accusations to the criminal justice system. So I can sum up, I think, the objections to a system like this. For thousands of years, survivors, and especially women, have been victimized by sexual assault with little recourse to justice. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, the police just wouldn't take these accusations seriously. And that is terrible. That is a real injustice. But this is something we've seen real improvements in recent decades. Sexual assault has declined significantly, and most of the time, rape victims are treated much more fairly by police and courts. Not always, but we're doing way better than we've ever done in the past. Now, be that as it may, this history doesn't excuse an unfair system on campuses.
Okay.
Yeah. Two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of this pushback is because it comes from Betsy DeVos? We kind of touched on that last time.
Yeah, absolutely.
If this was an Obama administration, do you think the pushback would be there?
I think there would be some, but not as much. And there are other things DeVos has done that make me very unhappy. Things like rolling back scrutiny of predatory for-profit colleges, denying recognition of trans rights. That shit all pisses me off.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me read a short quote from Jonathan Chait, writing in New York Magazine. And he's speaking about the Vox editor Ezra Klein. And he writes, Ezra Klein is not merely arguing that to make an omelet one must break some eggs. Ezra Klein is arguing for false convictions as a conscious strategy to strike fear into the innocent. That's really fucked up in my mind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and as Jonathan Chait says, this is a conception of justice totally removed from the liberal tradition. I think ultimately a system that's fairer, like the one DeVos has proposed, will ultimately benefit survivors because it will be more stable and more enduring. And to make that point, we need only look at how the existing 2011 system has been repudiated over and over in court.
Yeah. Oh, that's a mess.
Yeah. So the revisions that DeVos is proposing are not perfect, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And thank you for letting me get this off my chest, Alton.
No, it's fine. I think it's good to, especially even if listeners have some bit of data or an opinion or a question from the last podcast, I want to be able to address it. I want to be open to criticism, but then also thinking after the episode, listening to it, you wanted to add to it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So
Awesome.
I think that's a good part of the podcast.
Yep. So as always, if you're listening and you have questions, comments, or threats, send them in.
Yeah.